Welcome to BACKtalk, the premier podcast from Successful Black Parenting Magazine, featuring in-depth conversations and expert insights on crucial topics for Black families. We're ranked one of the top 4 Black family podcasts on FeedSpot, and I'm your host, Janice Robinson-Celeste. Now, studies show that imposter syndrome is more common and more intense among ethnic minority groups, and that these feelings can begin as early as 10 years old. So, if our children are already questioning whether they belong before they even hit high school, how do we raise them to own their brilliance instead of shrinking from it? There's more. Stay tuned, and I'll be right back.
This is BACKtalk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, the most listened to podcast for parents by parents.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning into BACKtalk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine, your go-to podcast talk show for parents. We are live, which means you can ask questions by posting in the comment section on our Facebook and YouTube comment area, but you got to do it early because we want to put your comment live on the show. Share our broadcast with your friends. Shout it out to your followers because sharing is truly caring. And don't forget to use hashtag BACKtalk when you post. Now, today on BACKtalk, I am speaking with Dr. Lisa and Dr. Richard Orbe-Austin. They wrote the book, Your Child's Greatness, A Parent's Guide to Raising Children Without Impostor Syndrome. Welcome to the show, doctors.
Thank you for having us, Janice.
Thank you. Now, we're going to try to split up some of these questions, or I may have you both ask the questions. That way we don't get confused of who needs to answer what, but we always do ladies first. So I hope you don't mind, Richard. Okay,
no,
ladies
not
first.
At all. Of course.
Okay. Well, Dr. Lisa, can you introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell them who you are and what led you to your life's work on imposter syndrome.
Yeah, so I am a psychologist and executive coach. I've been in practice for almost 20 years now, and I work with high-level executives and mid-level professionals who are looking to go to the next level. And I think I know what brought me into this work was that I experienced imposter syndrome myself, and it was a really difficult and painful experience that I experienced through most of my education, through most of my early work life, and it came to a head at one point, and it really just helped me to wake up and recognize how important it was to finally deal with it. And so I started to blog about it and write about it. And then our editor, that we didn't know at the time, came to us and asked us to write our first book on imposter syndrome. And so the first book we wrote was Own Your Greatness. It's all about kind of how to overcome it based on the research. And then the second piece is the second book is about cultures and organizations. And the third book is really about how to prevent it in your children. And so that's how it all came to be.
Wow. So I can relate to this because I still struggle with imposter syndrome. And I've said that many times on air in different places, but I want Dr. Richard to do the same thing, answer the same question, introduce yourself to our listeners, who you are, what led you to focus on this work about imposter syndrome.
Sure. So I also am a psychologist and executive coach, similar to Dr. Lisa. So I also work with high-level professionals, mid-level managers. One of the things that I saw in doing the work with my clients, both from a perspective of leadership, but also in seeking different types of career opportunities, is that imposter syndrome really limited their ability to fully embrace their potential. And so they would not take up certain leadership positions. They would not advance because they were afraid that they would be actually exposed as an imposter. And so that level of work made me recognize imposter syndrome was a key element that needed to be addressed. And then also, as Dr. Lisa indicated, watching her struggle through and supporting her through her imposter syndrome journey made me realize that it was something that we really wanted to address much more expansively in the work that we do.
Okay. Richard and Dr. Lisa, we do one little thing here on the show before we get deep into the subject matter, and that is an icebreaker. So we're going to go to that, and then we're going to go back to the topic at hand. But Dr. Lisa, if you can tell us one thing that most people don't know about you, it could be something fun or surprising or even a childhood dream, but tell us one thing that most people don't know.
that I'm an avid crocheter. And so I love crocheting, and I love crocheting baby blankets. So oftentimes my clients get baby blankets and friends. It's my true, one of my true loves is crocheting.
That is fantastic. I loved doing that when I was a kid. So, and Dr. Richard, it's your turn.
So I was going to say I'm an avid runner. So I run about 12 to 15 miles a week. So I really love the opportunity, especially to run outdoors. And so I haven't been able to do that recently, but the weather is nicer now in New York. So I'm excited to be more outdoors, but I try to get in my runs at least 3 to 5 times a week.
I was about to say I did say that's a lot. That's a lot. No, good for you. That's awesome. All right, Dr. Lisa, your new book, Your Child's Greatness, and we're going to put up here with us so people can see it. If you're watching the video, you can see it. If you're listening, you won't be able to see it, but you can always check it out. We're going to tell you how to get it at the end. But Your Child's Greatness is an important guide for parents. And why did you think it was time to focus on children in imposter syndrome, especially now? Because I never thought about children having this, and I don't honestly know what happened to us that we developed this as a young child. So maybe one of you can speak to that, but you can start, Dr. Lisa.
Yeah, I think, what struck us both while we wrote the book was because we're always trying to help people overcome it. Mm-hmm. And what we wanted to do was work on preventing it. So people always ask us, are there cohort effects? They don't say it that way. They say, are there generational effects about imposter syndrome? Do certain generations have it more than others? And the answer to that is no. That there haven't been generational effects, which makes me very sad, which means it's not decreasing, it's actually staying the same generationally. And so one of the things we thought about is, especially as counseling psychologists, was the preventative aspect of if people knew how it gets started, then they would approach potentially parenting differently to not engender these ideas around imposter syndrome with their children. And so that's really what got us started, is thinking about how can we change the cohort? Why can we start getting cohort effects where people have it less and less and less over generations and not the same?
I see. And there's not one thing you can point to in childhood to say this is not a good thing to do. Dr.
Yeah, there's tons. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna let Dr. Richard answer this now. But go take it away. Like, give us some examples. What shouldn't we be saying to our kids that might lend to this?
So one of the key things that we talk about is the roles that people take up or are given in childhood. And there are 3 specific roles that we talk about. The first role is that of the smart one. So even if you were doing just as well academically as someone else in your family, you are identified as the person who was a smart one. And so you take up that mantle, and then one day you actually reach a limit and you don't do as well academically. And then you start to think, maybe I'm a fraud. Maybe I wasn't the smart one this whole time, that I don't believe that I'm an imposter. So that's one role. 2, the second role is a hardworking one. So in contrast to the smart one, even again, if you did just as well as the smart one, you are identified as the hardworking one. The only way that you could do well is if you work extremely hard because you were just not as bright as the smart one. So that message made you feel like the only way that I can prove I belong is to work. And sometimes that leads to overwork and burnout when you're really working through different particular issues. And then the last role that we've identified was that of the survivor. So someone who was neglected in childhood, someone who did not get any feedback about being smart or hardworking, and they were just trying to survive. So they never were able to internalize their own skills or strengths. And they always felt like they might be exposed as a fraud because they really did not know who they were. And so one of the things we talk about with parents, coaches, mentors, caregivers is to not give children one fixed role, that you can be a smart one, you can be the hardworking one, all in the same way. And being able to recognize that you can take up different roles allows them to feel like they don't have to be so rigid in the way they see themselves in the world.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Now, I've done 0 research, but I'm going to sit on your couch for like 2 seconds. Okay. So I always thought it was because I went to Catholic school for too many years.
Too many.
Too many years.
We all
they always tell, and my mom.
We all did, actually.
We all did.
Did you?
Yeah.
Catholic schools.
I think that did it. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. I'm really joking. But the thing is, I always thought the request to be humble might have something to do with it, because we're always told we're be humble and we don't deserve, So I don't know. Am I onto something there? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a lot of like cultural pressures, kind of religious pressures, all kinds of pressures that, that kind of cause us to begin to think about ways in our lives in certain ways and ourselves in certain ways. And one of the things we always say is you can be humble and proud of yourself at the same time. These are not mutually exclusive concepts. And something that we want to teach our children too is that you can be proud of yourself and not do it in a way that is like problematic for other people. And so I think that's really important. I think also really something Richard always says, which just because it's cultural, don't make it right. And so, I think it's really important to recognize culture is a living, breathing thing and it changes over time. And sometimes cultural practices aren't actually that healthy or weren't developed in ways that were actually good for us productively. And so I think it's really good to question whether or not this cultural practice or whatever is actually working for you if it's hurting you in some way. And that can be really helpful too. And especially with teenagers as they begin to deconstruct and understand which communities they want to belong to, which values they have, which, puts people kind of fit with their life, is a great time to begin to think about sort of this idea of what kinds of things do you value, belong in, what works for you, what doesn't,
Yeah, and I'll add to that the authoritarianism or authoritarian parenting really is mirrored oftentimes, unfortunately, in certain religious practices where you just do as you're told, right? And not given the opportunity to really understand how to make decisions, how to do things in a particular way, can also contribute to the development of imposter syndrome, where you feel like the only thing you need to do is to please that authority figure or you will be punished. Never recognizing your own potential, your own strengths, your own ways of making decisions can also lead to imposter syndrome.
Wow. I hope all the parents are really listening to this, because even the 3 scenarios you gave, when you first gave the first 2, I was like, yeah, I don't relate to that. But the last one, for sure, I was left on my own because my parents were busy dealing with a special needs child. So they knew I wasn't going to get in trouble because I was not that kid. So I was always in my room playing my Barbies or playing my neighbors. I was off till the street lights came on, and then I had to get back home. And, I did everything I was supposed to do for the most part during my whole childhood. So, that I think I relate to. So I'm gonna get off your couch, okay? Get off the couch.
Well, I actually want to add to that because I think that is a fundamental story we often hear as some of the beginnings of imposter syndrome, is dealing in families where there was a family member who was either sick, mentally, physically, and they had to be good because there was no room for them to be anything else because parents couldn't handle more than one problem or more than one issue in the home. And so as a result, they had to shut down other parts of themselves where they were either wanted to break out of a norm or wanted to push the boundary or wanted to be displeasing, which is kind of a normal maturing thing, but they had to shove all that down. So the people pleasing became very important to their identity, like being, someone that's quiet, good, responsible. And then this leads into the further kinds of aspects of imposter syndrome in adulthood. And so it is really important, if you have a special needs kid or you have somebody who needs a lot of attention, that everyone gets attention in the household, whether you have to bring in other family members or other people to help you do that, but to not leave them on their own and not to in some ways champion their ability to parent themselves. Because in that parenting, they're too young to do it right. There's going to be a lot of mistakes made over the time that they need some adult supervision and adult kind of influence to kind of affect.
Wow. Now that's important. I'm so glad you said that. We have such a burst in special needs kids over the past few years, especially with autism and the various spectrums of it. And even in our own family, my daughter and my grandson, and I relate to her daughter who's older because it's the same situation that and I do my best to make sure that she gets attention because I know what it felt like,
Right.
So I get that. And I'm so glad you said that. So if you do have a special needs child, make sure that the other children are getting attention. It's so important. And who knew? Who knew? My parents didn't know back then.
Right.
I didn't know, but now we know. So
now we know.
We
do better. Yes.
Yeah.
So your book. So Dr. Richard, you both have written bestsellers for adults. What are some of the earliest signs that a child might be developing imposter syndrome, even in a loving home?
Sure. So when a child talks about a particular accomplishment and only says, well, I was just lucky, I know I can't do that again. If they did well on a test, they did well in a performance, they keep always attributing their success to luck if they consistently say everyone else is smarter than me, everyone else is faster than me, or plays an instrument better than me, those are sort of signals that they might be dealing with imposter syndrome, where they are very reluctant to take in any type of praise. They feel uncomfortable with that because it almost to them feels like they're not deserving of it. When if you ask them what type of strengths or skills they have, and they say, well, really nothing. People just like me. That's why I'm able to do things and I'm able to be successful. These are all some of the certain signs. The last thing I'll talk about is perfectionism. When they beat themselves up constantly if they make a mistake, and they are so perfectionistic because they may feel like that's the only way that they won't be exposed as a fraud. That's also a signal for imposter syndrome.
Wow. Okay, Dr. Lisa, what can we say to our children when they come to us and say those things?
I mean, I think it's really important to recognize, like, you don't want to dismiss it like offhand and be like, that's not true, because for them, it is true. It is actually what they feel, but we want to know more about why they feel this way and what got it started. And like, when did something, is someone communicating this to you? And if not, we start to help them develop some of the skills that we talk about in the book around dealing with automatic negative thoughts and really working on being able to take in positive feedback, to have an internal sense of what is success for themselves. But we're building certain characteristics that allow them not to rely solely on external validation in order to feel good enough or like smart enough or capable enough. Because this particular skill becomes really important over time, is really understanding what feels like success for you and what is an accomplishment for you. And even if somebody else doesn't think it is, like, what matters most is that you find it to be a very important moment for you. And so really helping them to identify things like automatic negative thoughts, the perfectionism, and helping them to deal with it in effect, like to in vivo while they're doing with it. And I think it's really hard as a parent with a perfectionistic kid, because sometimes they're really like lovely, they're getting straight A's, they're kind of like, doing the thing, being responsible. But oftentimes they are also doing a lot of stuff for themselves internally that makes it really painful. While it looks great on the outside, inside there's a lot of pain going on, trying to stay the A student, or trying to make sure that they stay captain of the team, or whatever it might be, but to also be curious about what's happening inside too, even if the kid is doing amazing.
Oh, wow. So are we reinforcing imposter syndrome by saying, oh, no, you're not? Or how do we avoid that?
Yeah, so I think being curious about their particular situation, it's an automatic response to want to make your child feel better immediately. So you say, oh, no, I don't know. What are you talking about? That's not true. That can't be true. But if you do that in the moment, it then dismisses the experience that they might be having. And so to Lisa's point, really being able to ask a question, what makes you say that? Like, what has happened in your experience that's made you say that? And so oftentimes with automatic negative thoughts, they will really believe, for instance, we talk about mind reading, where they say everyone knows that I'm not as smart as everyone else in the class. And we say, well, where's the evidence for that? Right. And when you help them to challenge the data that it doesn't exist and help them to create a more positive statement, the challenge that we face in this environment is that everything is so fast paced and so go, 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 right, that sometimes we don't have the opportunity to take a step back and just be curious with our children. We just really are on to the next thing. And so slowing down enough to really be able to, when your child comes to you and says something like that, to say, wait a minute, this may require more of a conversation than just saying, oh, no, don't believe that, or don't listen to that, that's silly. It really is engaging with them and taking some time to do that.
Yeah. And since this conversation really is about Black families, it makes me think about sort of all the messaging that Black children often get about, their accomplishments, their skills, their abilities. I was recently talking to a friend of mine who's a Black woman, and she's been talking to this teenager who just got into like an Ivy League school. And all the messages he's receiving is that he got into it solely because he's Black. And yet he is a straight A student, had great SAT scores, like all of that. But he's still getting the message that he only got it because he's Black. And he's super anxious and he's super depressed and he feels super like it's taken away the joy of getting into this Ivy League school. And a lot of us have experienced that. I experienced it when I was in college. Like the first week of college, everyone was asking me what my SAT score was on my entire floor. Because they didn't believe I got in because I deserved to get in. So a lot of us are being told we are not smart enough, we are not capable of enough, that we get things because of our race. And so it makes it very the desire to prove yourself and prove that you are worthy gets ingrained very early on.
Right. You actually segued right into my next question, because I was wondering how being Black or brown intersect with imposter syndrome in children, and what do we parents need to be especially mindful of? You gave us great things to look for early on, but what do we have to look for? We have to look out for other people now. You're saying that say things.
Yes, yes. So we typically talk about the double impact of imposter syndrome that Black and brown children will face. So on one hand, internally, they feel like an imposter, but then externally, there are messages in the environment that are telling them you don't belong, you're an imposter. And so being able to be mindful for your children as to what they're experiencing in these different spaces, what messages are being sent to them, is also important. And one of the biggest challenges is a lot of it is communicated through social media, right? Some of it may be in places that are not as evident to us because it's behind the scenes to some extent. So it's having conversations with them about what they're consuming, what they're seeing, what, how they're engaging with people on social media, which can feel a bit uncomfortable, right? And feel like they may want to be protective of that. But if they're dealing with something that's difficult, where someone's saying to them, oh, you don't belong, or you're not smart, or you don't deserve to be here, we want to be able to know and understand how to then support them through some of those challenges.
And I'll add, like, what the research has shown too around this is that community becomes so important, especially for, kids who are going to PWIs. So, primarily white institutions, like predominantly white institutions, they need community that is also Black and brown around them, that is like kind of doing the same thing that they are, or is a little bit higher, like has had maybe, if they're in high school, has gone to college, but is very similar to them, because they need people who will understand their experience and have been successful in a lot of ways that they can relate to and connect to, that will help them when the external messages happen, like you don't belong here because you got in because of your race, that somebody says, that's not true. That's racism. And somebody can actually help them not internalize these external messages and understand what they truly are. And I think that becomes so important, especially with these external kind of messaging, that you understand that you are not to take that in. That does not belong to you. And so that piece, and you're not going to work 10 times as hard in order to prove that you belong here. You're just going to do your job. You're going to enjoy school. You're going to go to school. And so I think that becomes so important. Community around similar identity lines becomes incredibly important, especially when kids are in PWIs.
Oh, absolutely. You touched on this a little bit earlier about just dismissing something your child says, like, I'm not good enough. What role does language play at home? And are there certain phrases that parents should stop saying and others we should start using more? And you kind of alluded to that with trying to find out more.
Yeah. And I think, it's so easy to say, you're so smart, and I think what we want to really kind of emphasize is not these kind of characteristics that feel very kind of like fixed and feel like either you're smart or you're not, or you're this or that, but to recognize that they contributed to whatever they actually produced. So if they got an A, they studied really hard and that was the outcome. So it can really help them give a sense of agency to why they accomplish things. Things don't, like we talk about with imposter syndrome, when people have imposter syndrome, they attribute their success to one of four things: luck, mistake, overwork, or a relationship. And so we want them to recognize that even if those things are involved to some extent, they are also contributing to the outcome and they can take credit for the outcome. And so we're often focusing on the things that they did to make them successful. And I also think we're also embracing a ton of failure. And we're enjoying the mistakes that they made. We're teaching them how to learn from them and fail forward. And that can be really scary when you're a person of color, when you're Black. And it feels like if you make one mistake, it's all over. And we want to give them some feelings of latitude around that, because when you don't feel like you can make a mistake, life becomes super, super fragile and scary. Mm-hmm. And so we want them to feel like they can make mistakes and we can teach them how to recover from those mistakes, that you don't need to get 100 on every test. There are ways for you to kind of understand how to cope with a C or a D, or, like these things are not life ending,
Right. But there are going to be some parents out there, if you don't have an A or B, it's a big deal on your report card. So, Dr. Richard, how do we balance encouraging excellence without tying our child's self-worth to their achievements?
So I oftentimes talk about this notion of striving for greatness rather than perfectionism, because when you strive for perfectionism, it's just a futile endeavor. And so being able, on one hand, to really celebrate effort and hard work and being able to get to a particular outcome. And if you don't reach that particular outcome, really being able to talk to your child about what they can do differently, but also what they did well in that particular situation. So we talk about adopting what we call a growth mindset, which was coined by Dr. Carol Dweck, where we talk about mistakes are an opportunity to grow rather than proof that you don't belong. And so ultimately, clearly, we don't want them constantly making mistakes, but we want to be able to tolerate, because oftentimes, again, we're all ambitious, we're all striving, we want our children to do better than we actually have done. So there is this pressure that we have both internally and externally, right? Because the environment is telling you that they have to compete, that the landscape is much more competitive. And so they're always thinking, well, an A- is not going to be good enough. I need straight A's, and they can beat themselves up and you can beat them up. But it's being able to balance the fact that when they don't reach the goal, really talking about the effort, celebrating, those mini accomplishments and those opportunities for them to learn and to grow.
Let me just piggyback on that for a second too, to add the fact that, I have helped many a kid that doesn't have a perfect, GPA get into grad school. And, it's about the story you tell about what happened, so you don't need straight A's to go to Harvard. You can actually have not straight A's and go to Harvard. It's really about sort of the experience of like how you kind of talk about or explain what happened. And if that kind of connects for them and you learn something from it, that's more exciting than a perfect record. And I think the other piece here is if your kid is consistently failing, if they're consistently struggling, and we talk about this in the book too, it's, not to term it as lazy. We don't believe in lazy. What we believe in is that something is going on that you're not seeing. And so we are big believers in neuropsych testing and to get your child evaluated, because we do see a strong correlation between imposter syndrome and learning disabilities and learning differences. So it's really important we get these things. And I know in the Black community, we're often really afraid of our kids being stigmatized and diagnosed, but sometimes early intervention is the best thing we can do for them, because otherwise they develop an identity that they're not so smart, they're not so good. Meanwhile, something was going on that we could have intervened on.
No, I agree 100% with that. Early is best. Now, what kinds of everyday habits or rituals can parents practice to help build a child's sense of belonging and self-trust?
So one of the things that is an easy win is just having some conversations with your children about, their day and some of the things that they really enjoyed, or some of the things that may have been more challenging, right? Even if they're young, even if they're 5 or 6, to say, hey, how was your day today? How was school? What did you enjoy? What did you like? Talk more about that with me. So really having a ritual where you engage with them, you learn about who are they becoming, and then being able to give them opportunities to share with you, some of their successes, some of the challenges, to really help you to understand how to intervene should they need it, and to support them in those different ways. So the other thing we talk about is just celebrating, as we said, these accomplishments. So sometimes it's not a large accomplishment, but finding opportunities to say, oh, you did great on X. You put in great effort, talking about some of the things that they may not have even recognized as an achievement, and helping them to internalize that.
Okay. How should parents handle situations where their child is the only one in the classroom, the only one in school, like you mentioned earlier, the only Black child on the team or program, and they start to feel isolated or less than? And you talked about that a little bit earlier, Dr. Lisa. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so that was my experience growing up. My parents didn't go to college, and so my dad had a job in technology. He was a computer programmer, and he went wherever he was transferred because he really didn't feel like he had a choice about saying no or asking to stay. So we ended up in a kind of rural town in Pennsylvania, and in the early 1970s, and we were the only family of color in this entire town. We would go to malls, and people would point at us. It was pretty terrible. And I think one of the things that definitely got my imposter syndrome started was this feeling of that I wasn't good enough and that I was different, and that I was also tracked in school. And tracking is this experience where Black and brown kids end up in the classes that are like, special needs when they don't need to be, or like, so I was in a program where my education was slowed down tremendously because there weren't enough seats in a room for me. And so it really did send a really clear message to me that I wasn't smart, I wasn't good enough.
Sorry.
It's all right.
It's only certain people can get through on my phone, but I am on a podcast. So sorry.
It's all right.
Only the important people. So I apologize.
It's all right. Totally all right. And I think, one of the things that I didn't have, which I think I would have needed more of, which is community. And sometimes when we go to PWIs, and we're in all white communities, it's not easy to find that. But I think it's so important. Like, for example, like doing Jack and Jill, or doing some place where people can be around other Black people that they can connect to and look up to. Like, our daughters, we have 2 daughters. They're now both teenagers. I just said that for the first time. And one of the things that when they were growing up, we live in Manhattan, and Manhattan has become, very largely predominantly white in all of their experiences. And so, one of the things that became really important for us was for them to get exposure. And so we thought about it really hard. Like, how can we get them exposure to other Black people? We have to do it purposefully. Mm-hmm. And so we got them involved in fencing, because there was a fencing team that was begun by Peter Westbrook, who is a 6-time Olympian in fencing, who is Black, and created all this opportunity for Black kids to get to fence, Black, brown, all kinds of kids. And so they've developed a community where they not only saw Black people, but they saw Black excellence as normal. They met Olympians, they met world champions, they met graduates from Columbia and Harvard, and that was normal to them. There was nothing odd about it. And so that was really important for us. And it ended up being such an important community, and still is an important community for them today. But we did it with intention. And I think for parents, if you're in one of these environments, you have to do it with intention, and it has to be consistent, because they need other people around them that are like them.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. Now, Dr. Richard, I'm going to let you go first, but I want both of you to answer this question. What's the one thing you hope every parent takes away from your book, Your Child's Greatness, something that could make a real difference today?
Well, one of the things I oftentimes talk about is the fact that parents oftentimes don't feel like they have a level of influence on their children anymore. And so they feel like between school and other types of extracurriculars that they have lost the ability to really impact what their children are doing and how their children see themselves in the world. So the one thing that I want you to take away is that you do have a good deal of influence still in being able, no matter how old your child is, whether they're pre-adolescent, teenager, young adult, you still have an opportunity to influence how they see themselves in the world. So don't give up that power.
Absolutely. And you, Dr. Lisa?
I think I would probably say, parenting is hard, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and it's okay. Our kids are pretty plastic, in the sense that they can adapt to the mistakes that are made. It's okay if some of the things that we said you've done, it's okay. The key is to do something different moving forward and give yourself some grace. And the book is really written with grace, because we need the grace, Richard and I, as parents, and we want to give grace to parents to really be like, we are not necessarily taught how to parent. And then our kids, struggle in ways that we don't know how to deal with. And it's okay. That's why the book exists,
All right. Where can our listeners follow you, get your book, keep learning from your work on imposter syndrome and self-empowerment?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram pretty regularly. I'm Dr. Orbe-Austin. Richard is Dr. Richard Orbe-Austin.
Dr. Richard Orbe-Austin.
Dr. Richard Orbe-Austin.
She doesn't follow you. That's what that is.
I know. I just found that out. Imagine.
Go ahead.
And we're on LinkedIn pretty actively as well. Okay. And our book is available at all major booksellers: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all of the big.
And 2 other things. So we actually now have a Instagram handle specifically for the book and for parenting advice. It's called @SmartParentingStrategies. @SmartParentingStrategies. And again, you can find out more about us at our website, dynamictransitionsllp.com.
Okay. And I put it right up on the screen so you can see where their website is located. Type it in. So I hope you guys go and follow them as well as us. But I want to thank you both for coming on the show. So it's been a pleasure. And this is a really good show, except for my daughter calling me. But this is a really good show.
She wanted to join.
She's falling in the comment, maybe.
I know. But no, thank you. And keep us updated. I want to know even more as you learn more, because like I said, I know that I was affected by this, and I can see, like, how it can affect other children, especially right in my family. So this is a great interest of mine. So again, thank you so much.
You're
was
so
our
welcome.
pleasure.
It's been a
Thank
joy.
you.
Okay. And I want to thank all of you and give you a big shout out for watching the replay of this, watching it live. And I want you to follow us on all social media, click on everything, follows, likes, ads. And until next time, I wish you all the best and much success. Take care. And thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to BACKtalk by Successful Black Parenting Magazine. We'll see you soon.